Good afternoon and evening, depending on where you are in the US. I'm Jennifer Asselstine. I'm the undergraduate director at the Academy of Art University, and I'm here with my colleagues to present and discuss the 15 years of institutional knowledge that we've collected as we've rolled out all of our online offerings starting in 2006. I'm here with Mimi Sullivan, our executive director of the School of Architecture, who founded the architecture department and gained our first accreditation for the graduate program in 2006. Just as we offered our very first online class. Eric Lum, our online director who created the presentation you're about to see, has led all of the aspects of online components of the programs since 2010. And in 2011, I came on as a director. We were just offering our first undergraduate studio online, which was a first in the United States, I believe. I now run a hybrid building systems class. It's on-site, online, graduate, and undergraduate. In fact, the COVID issues that we've faced in the last couple of months have actually brought those students closer together. Mark Mueckenheim is our graduate director who shaped the graduate program curriculum since 2013 and has co-created graduate studio curriculum for online delivery. And Karen Seong, the undergraduate assistant director, who's worked to develop a hybrid fourth-year studio environment for the last 3 years. Spending Friday afternoon together is our ritual, so welcome to our directors meeting. We're extremely collaborative about all aspects of our work, perhaps to a point of pain, but mostly it's a source of pride. Like you, we all find ourselves now teaching virtually in some form or another. And our unique perspective is that we have this depth of experience and we're always trying to look beyond the next hurdle. My son, who lives in Chicago, joked with me a couple weeks ago that in Illinois, marijuana went from illegal to essential in 3 months. It's somewhat of a metaphor for us as we feel that the architectural online education went from highly suspect to extremely critical in 10 years. With that said, we offer you this overview of a range of topics that we've been covering for the last decade and a half. Thank you.
This presentation is geared towards faculty and institutions who operate largely on-site and have had to, by necessity, recently switch to a different medium. But it also proposes the prospect of how teaching online may be a useful supplement or alternative to conventional on-site classes and studios. We have found through experience that once the initial novelty of teaching online has worn off, harder questions and pedagogical issues will emerge that need to be addressed. To clarify, we will be talking here today about regular classes and studio courses and not MOOCs in this discussion. Through a continuous process of revisions and updates, we continue to learn and build upon what works and what doesn't in the online environment. Here, we present 10 basic points to keep in mind as you switch to an online mode and potentially incorporate it as an integral aspect of your program. Each one of these points is a topic worthy of a session itself, so we will only briefly touch on some of the major aspects of each and discuss them further in the discussion period. Communication is key, no matter what space you work in. Communicate clearly, often, and consistently. Use different modes: images, drawings, text, messaging, voice, whatever works. Hold regular individual as well as group meetings. Much of architectural teaching, especially in the design studio, happens implicitly and in the context of the physical studio environment, which is no longer present. Aspects discussed in a video conversation may not be remembered or followed through. Document and send after your meeting what the bullet points and action items are. Don't assume that the student understands what you are talking about or directing them to do. Ask the student what he or she understands the direction to be. And a reminder that, as we all know by now, Zoom fatigue is a real issue. So schedule your virtual meetings with specific times in mind. Listen to your faculty. For many instructors who are used to teaching in person, switching over to a purely digital environment may prove to be a challenge. Understand from them what are the hard points for online teaching and what are the challenges that prevent them from teaching more effectively. Help them how to teach online with best practices. Faculty who teach the same courses online and on-site are invaluable in understanding the differences and relative advantages of each. Identify any technical or methodological restrictions that they may be facing and see how these issues can be resolved by finding the right hardware or software tools, or if the problem can be handled in a different manner. Incorporate TA support and workshops to support instructors and courses in an online mode. Your faculty may be the best source of ideas and inspiration. Listen to your students. Read student evaluations to understand what they are missing. What are their complaints? Students don't know what they don't know. Their immediate issue may not be the underlying problem. Identify their frustrations and limitations in the online space and see what tools and facilities they need in order to move ahead. Some students who may have been quieter on-site may find their voice in the online environment, while conversely, those who may have been the most prominent figures on-site may find working purely online to be a challenge. A combination of individual and group meetings is an effective teaching strategy. Be clear about what you expect your students to do and how they do it. Ostensibly simple tasks such as drawing and model making can be ambiguous and potentially confusing without the context of the physical studio environment and the interpersonal support and clarification of fellow students. Be specific about what is expected. Clarity, however, is not spoon-feeding or rote learning, but rather being precise about your expectations. Similarly, there needs to be a clear framework for how grading levels are assessed and how students achieve those levels. Especially for design studios, which are often graded in a holistic manner by the instructor based on his or her past experience, lies a deeper and more complex set of criteria that needs to be explicitly spelled out, especially in the online environment. Use a combination of visual and textual rubrics in order to clarify for both students and instructors what the expectations and grading levels are. Show poor examples as well as good ones. It may not necessarily be clear, especially to beginning design students, what good or bad work is, especially without the context of the physical studio. Most university systems have a robust technological infrastructure, but unless your institution is explicitly geared towards online teaching, existing tools may be underutilized. Explore and incorporate existing facilities such as digital library resources and video content into coursework. Look at providing remote desktop access to computer labs and CAD/CAM tools. Take a deeper dive into understanding exactly what your learning management system is capable of and how you can incorporate it into your curriculum as a framework for course content, office hours, attendance, discussions, grading, testing, archiving, administration, and statistical information. Conversely, also understand its limitations and use alternative tools and methods where necessary. Learning management systems are an excellent container for structured static content, but be aware that creating, maintaining, and updating this content requires significant time and effort. For software and other courses, a combination of static and new content with recorded demos can be used. For studio-based courses that may change their focus every semester, an open-ended structure may be more appropriate. Hold live workshops for skill-specific tasks, such as CAD and model making. We've found that live sessions are generally most helpful to students needing to solve an immediate problem in meeting with a teacher. though recorded videos can also be useful. Incorporate live and archival online resources. Create a how-to library for manual and digital skills, drawing, rendering, model making, and so on. Field trips, interviews, site and case study visits. A hybrid of live meetings and recorded resources with synchronous and asynchronous interaction can be a powerful combination. See how ESL, accessibility, and other administrative support can be supported online. Studio culture. How you define it, how you support it, the kind of studio environment you wish to foster is key to the educational experience for any school of architecture. Much design learning happens by looking at the work of fellow students as much as it is getting guidance from their studio teachers, not only within their own studio, but also with the work from other studios and spaces within the larger physical context and function of the architecture school as a living archive. Without this physical resource, a large part of implicit contextual teaching disappears. So, examine what the studio culture of your school is, how teaching and learning happens implicitly and explicitly, and think about how to develop this in an alternative digital context. It may not be a simple replication of the physical space, but may bring with it different tools and methods. Build your virtual community. Bring students together into a common virtual space. Hold an orientation or boot camp, especially for students who are mostly or fully online. Hold town hall meetings and studio introductions on a regular basis. Remember the human element throughout. Introduce your students to each other at the beginning of class as a simple means to pull your students together. Get them to work with each other where possible. Use messaging apps for persistent chat sessions for student-to-student interaction. Bring social media as appropriate. Create a space for professors and students to interact. Use digital whiteboards to show studio projects and invite students and faculty to observe their work. Invite students from different studios to virtual studio pinups and reviews. Year-end studio and thesis reviews can be a great opportunity to bring students and faculty together. Stream lectures and reviews. Create a common platform to contain your virtual community. Communicate using both synchronous and asynchronous tools. Even in the virtual context of the online environment, there is still a distinct sense of identity for each school. No two schools are alike. Bring your legacy, your methodologies, your professional connections with you into the online space. Consider the unique aspects of your school and strategize how to bring these into the online space. Invite local practitioners, global critics, and alumni to reviews and events. Bring in engineers, landscape architects, consultants, and faculty from other departments that you would not normally be able to invite to a review. Invite an entire office to a review, from the principals down to the interns. Portfolio reviews, ad hoc guest lectures, mixers, and year-end exhibitions can be conducted online. Advertise your presence on social media. The accreditation process is an opportunity to collect and reflect on the structure and direction of the work of your school, and your LMS can and should be a valuable archival tool for accreditation purposes. Properly structured and maintained, it can create a complete digital record for the work of every student for all of your classes, which can then be archived and digitally accessed. Used in a course context, an LMS-based course can be a repository for both final work as well as in-progress work, and it is important to capture both. Record final studio and thesis reviews as part of the archive. Consider how to capture all coursework from every student and how you want to structure and display this information. A networked environment is not just a means of teaching in a different mode, but it can also open a host of new educational opportunities. Studios with faculty abroad, for instance, can expand your abilities to bring in guest teachers. Use collaborative design tools such as BIM 360 for cloud-based group design projects. Sharing cloud-based files are ideal for complex integrated design studios and other group projects such as design build. Consider collaborations with other departments and other universities to further your national and international partnerships with other schools. Consider studios that move away from the conventional studio master system, such as collaborative studios that involve multiple teachers and a wider range of visiting critics and consultants. Look at partnering with firms that can embed a studio within their own office workflow and research. Look at how design collaboration happens in professional offices, especially those with multiple locations, and understand how you might incorporate similar workflows. Offering an online course section can provide the option for either an online synchronous mode for students as well as an offline asynchronous one. Distance students who prefer the mode of a live class may take the former, while students who are unable to attend the live class may opt for the latter. For on-site classes, an alternative may be a hybrid learning environment, bringing together the advantages of on-site and online tools, synchronous and asynchronous means of communication. Consider how you may be able to offer a wider variety of courses online in order to reach a broader audience, such as post-professional, NCARB prep, continuing educational, and certificate programs. The dam is now broken. What was previously thought by many to be an unfeasible or impractical method of learning is now by necessity standard practice. What this current crisis has forced upon the design teaching community is the realization that teaching architecture online is indeed possible. Not that we have any illusions about the limitations and roadblocks faced in an online-only environment. We still believe that in-person teaching is preferable because of its immediacy and environmental immersiveness. And it will be important in these coming weeks and months to reflect upon what the particular issues are that you will face and how best to respond to these challenges in the short and long term. Going forward, consider how what you are doing now is not simply an ad hoc emergency response to an immediate crisis, but rather a means to expand and leverage your institutional strengths to create new teaching possibilities. Online teaching is now here for all of us, and we welcome your thoughts and participation in thinking about and expanding upon what it means to teach architectural design online. We now look forward to your questions.
Hello, this is Eric Lum. Glad to meet you all live. And this is one of the quirks about being in the online space. We can either be live or synchronous or asynchronous or here or there. And so welcome wherever you happen to be. Obviously, there were a lot of images, a lot of slides, which you may have questions about. So we welcome your questions or comments there. Some of the things that we did show, I think are worth talking about, one of which was a joint studio that we've had a couple of them actually, where we've had a combination of on-site students working with online students, and we continue to do that today. And another really interesting collaboration that we did last semester was another joint studio with Cranbrook in Michigan, both of which were very successful, I think. I would add that for the most people who are here, who are doing this for the first time, I realize that a lot of you started off obviously teaching on site and have had to move online. And that's actually a huge advantage. If you start off completely online, that's a really different mode than if you have at least some kind of face time, some kind of personal interaction with a student ahead of time. If you can do that, if you're planning to do this in the future, I would certainly recommend at least some portion of the contact happen on site. It makes things a lot easier. And just one final anecdote. Obviously, we have been doing this for quite a while. And in the beginning, the first few years, I would say it is difficult. It's difficult both for students as well as for instructors. And it was a challenge getting teachers to teach and the students to get their work up to snuff to the level that we wanted it to be. And I think we're at the point where, if not, the online students are on the same level. I would say in some cases, they're actually maybe better in some instances, which is an interesting thing to see. So we can talk about those aspects later on. I think now I want to introduce our executive director, Mimi Sullivan. Mimi?
Thanks, Eric. I just had to find my unmute button. And welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. I reflect back on this when we started our online teaching 15 years ago. I was skeptical. No, actually, I was very skeptical. And while I understood the university's desire to reach as many people as possible with a, quote, arts education that might not have access to it, whether it was distance or life obligations that might have kept them from coming to on-campus education, as it were, it was really hard to imagine teaching online successfully. And you may be feeling that way right now. Furthermore, as an architect myself who was trained in person, it was difficult to imagine how we would do and support so many of the things we understand are pivotal to the architectural education. Some of these Eric already mentioned, but I think they're worth repeating. Horizontal learning, where students are seeing each other's work process and product, lifting each other up or sparking dialogue. I think model making, of course, as a vehicle to teaching craft and attention to detail was certainly a challenge. Creating community, building the studio culture online, providing the architectural education, immersion that we all probably experienced ourselves. Again, a big hurdle that we've, I think, chipped away at pretty successfully. And field trips, you know, that's kind of some of the obvious things. Eric's presentation that you just viewed, I believe, answers how we have over the years addressed some of these things and continue to do so. It's not a fait accompli. It is a work in progress always. Of course, the technology to support our platform of online teaching has also improved by leaps and bounds. So you have the benefit of that at this point in time that we didn't have. So that's made a huge difference. So as an educator and an active practitioner myself, I believe online teaching will continue to be this work in progress, just as remote collaboration is in our profession. I think about our online students going into the workforce, and I think they'll be ultimately equipped to enter a global workplace and will come to the workplace, whether in person or remotely, with all of those tools of asynchronous and synchronous communication with our clients, our consultants, and all of our stakeholders. And I see that as a real benefit. I also see online teaching morphing into architectural practice as becoming more seamless. I say that because in my own firm, I've had 2 staff working remotely for the past year and a half, a function of the high cost of living in the Bay Area. People have moved to other states, but we did not want to lose their value. So we embarked on a remote staffing situation akin to our online teaching. And so to echo what Eric presented, we found a few very basic takeaways to make that successful. The resources you have are key for remote desktop access. Get all the tools you need. In-person meetings in real time with video cameras on is a must. It's a must. Bluebeam or concept board, as 2 examples. to share drawings, share screens, record notations, with the ability to save and email that collaborative work product immediately and send it to meeting members has been amazing. Bringing in guests, as Eric mentioned, experts, consultants from across the Bay, just given our traffic prior, or across the globe, that we would not have had access or the resources to bring in person is truly amazing. So what I want to tell you is 15 years later, to say I'm a convert is probably an understatement. I'm a believer in both the in-person teaching that we've always known as rich, but I'm also a believer in the online teaching that we've been able to accomplish, not overnight, but over 15 years of trial and error, and then assessment, and then repeat all of the above. So a work in progress. I sincerely hope all of you architectural educators and practitioners, given this place we're finding ourselves in, even when this crisis is over, you'll consider online and on-site education as two equally viable delivery systems to educate the next generation of architects wherever they are, and prepare them for a collaborative global workplace. I think it will do us all good. Thanks. I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Mark's next.
Hi, thank you, Mimi. Thank you all for coming. My name is Mark Mueckenheim, and I'm an architect, as you hear from my accent. I'm an architect from Germany, and I'm with the Academy since 2013 as the graduate director. And I always say, or as a foreigner, what I always admire about Americans is their entrepreneurial mind. No matter what you throw at you guys, you kind of find the good and the opportunity in things. So being a German, I have more of an engineering mind. I see more the problems in things, right? So when I first interviewed with the School of Architecture with Eric Lum, I said, oh yeah, online education, that is the future. And Eric was like correcting me all the time saying, no, it's the present. That's what we're already doing. And that was actually really surprising to me. And just like Mimi said, I had a really big, I had a big skepsis about the whole, how do you teach online? How do you teach architecture online? And the engineering mind told me, this is not possible. You have to solve this. And then throughout the years I've been with the school, I think I witnessed a lot of amazing improvements and a lot of things that we were doing on site. We actually were able to bring online in a same or similar quality with the tools that are available to the students over there. And I will just probably share some more hands-on things that I think are really important to the online teaching realm. One is the tools, and I see a lot of questions in the chat pod about the tools. I think it's not really the one tool. It's not just Zoom. It's not just Concept Board. It's not just the LMS, but how these tools actually work together. And I think the way we're setting, or I'm understanding after 7 years now with the school, I'm understanding how we approach online is that the LMS is providing kind of a textbook of the course with all its assignments, with content that is written and prepared by faculty, a course author that might teach or might not teach the class. It's lectures that are uploaded to this LMS as well that bring in a framework from either the course author or teacher or both or other people. And then it's live interaction while the students are going through this. And I think in many regards, these textbook assignments, I now view them slightly differently than on-site. On-site, I would just give them an assignment, they would work on it, and I would comment on the assignment so I can guide them through a process. While online, when they're working asynchronously, I think this process has to be orchestrated and curated so that they will go through an experience in this process. And while they're going through it, they can reach out to the teaching faculty for comments and live interactions to solve the obstacles they are finding in gearing towards this solution of this problem they're faced with. So I think in many regards, I'm very, my skepticism was overturned. I'm very surprised how well a lot of things are working that I was skeptical about. And I think we made a lot of strides in the last years. And I'm surprised that we see sometimes, like, as Eric said, even better work online and on site. And I feel that that's also to the way we are working together as a team, like the way what Mimi was saying, that we evaluate, that we come back and look at what has happened and what was done in the courses and how the curriculum works together in sync and all these separate parts that make up a course. I think I want to turn it over to the next member in our panel, Karen Seong. I think.
Hi, everyone. This is Karen. I just want to share very quickly 2 observations based on having taught the same design course. I teach a 4th-year undergrad design course simultaneously on-site and online for 6 cycles. And the one is, you know, I mean, it's something that, you know, may come as very obvious, but so when in an on-site studio environment, you know, we all come to the same building that, you know, houses the architecture department. So that building becomes an equalizer. You know, it's the students and faculty who, you know, come to class, come to studio in the same building. We have the same access to the people, the tools, the culture, context, even the weather. You know, so, and I think by students inhabiting the same spaces, especially for the undergraduate students, you know, just coming to studio and, you know, working at your studio desk, you know, exhibiting your work in progress on your desk for others to see, is making public their shared commitment to the study of architecture. And so in a way, you know, just coming to class every day is a small act of celebration. But for online students, you know, that isn't the default starting line. So it takes more deliberate effort, definitely more time, and a lot of empathy to actually construct this shared virtual studio. So as we all know, you know, learning is about changing, you know, one's previously held assumptions. And without the trust, without an underlying trust, that change, you know, simply doesn't happen, right? There's really no true meaningful learning. And so this relationship of trust between the faculty and student happens a little bit more fluidly, perhaps naturally in an on-site student environment, and, you know, when you have in-person interactions. But in an online interaction, it takes more effort, it takes more time, but it's all the more important. And I think something like that, you know, I usually very explicitly say it on the outset, right? So not just the faculty, but even among the students, we have to work a lot harder to get there. And then the second point, observation I just want to share is that the diversity online in our online student population is very different than the diversity in our on-site student body. Our on-site student body, we have a very culturally diverse and very socioeconomically diverse student body. But they all, you know, come to the same building. They all now live here in San Francisco or in the greater Bay Area. Our online students do not. They tend to be scattered across the continent and beyond. Some of our students live in a town as small as 13,000 in Lacombe, Alberta, Canada. You know, others are in metropolitan environments like Seoul, South Korea, or China. But often the contexts, the life circumstances, you know, that led them to opt for an online education means that they share very little commonalities with our on-site student body. And in a field of study that asks students to imagine the realities of other people in order to design spaces for them, this is a particularly valuable opportunity, especially for our younger students in the undergrad who perhaps lack you know, less years of life experiences, to really try to imagine and empathize with, you know, somebody who had to or chose to study architecture online. So I just want to share those 2 points. I'm going to turn over next to our moderator, Jennifer.
Thanks, Karen. I'm just going to touch on a few things because I see a lot of great questions coming up. And I just want to say that Eric's presentation really revealed the history of our program as this incredibly radical juxtaposition of our super messy physical studio environment, very tactile, and then this somewhat sterile, really highly organized initial online offerings that were outlined and structured initially by the university. And as an architecture school, we've been working, I would say 15 years, 24/7, trying to bring those 2 together, and we're making some headway. It's been a constant search for the best tools and the communication integration. It's been both thrilling when you see something finally working. It's been incredibly awkward as well. But in 2018, December 2018, we had our first graduating cohort, very tiny cohort from our BARC program, and it brought together 2 people, a passionate Syrian refugee living in LA, and a very diligent student raising his family in Aberdeen, South Dakota. And their 2 thesis projects were also remarkable, or as remarkable. One was a vision of Damascus after the war, and the other one was a vision of a small Midwestern town that would no longer be split in two by the trains that don't even stop in the town. And so I think it's that juxtaposition that kind of, for me, is the high point and the most satisfying, that those viewpoints came together, not just once, but in a whole series of studios that the students shared. Those students also were involved in hybrid studios and group projects with peers on site. The other high points, as Eric has mentioned, have been these collaborations. Our second-year students have figured out how to collaborate across the online platform and literally and digitally stitch their physical concepts together. And we had the collaboration with Cranbrook, which was amazing, where they harnessed a whole series of sites in Detroit and used storytelling and filmmaking and speculative physical models. And those have all taken very different modes. But in some ways, the kind of trauma of COVID-19 has brought us back to these really fundamental challenges of simply providing what I would call a conducive learning environment. I was in a class meeting yesterday where a young first-year student who used to be on site as of 4 weeks ago was sitting on a Zoom meeting in his car, and his rough cardboard model was in a photograph on a whiteboard where we could see it, but he was nowhere near his model. And when I asked him why he was separate from the environment where he was making that model, he said that his environment at home with 2 young children that were trying to be homeschooled, I think they were probably not older than 6, just created a space that was not possible for him to be in class in. And so it really comes back to the fact that all of us are trying to create this sacred space called education. And climate change and inequality and world crises like this pandemic are going to hit home immediately in these virtual environments. So it really comes down to how people are coping with what's around them. So with that, I'm going to launch into our amazing questions. I'm going to try and do 2 things: keep the questions flowing and pay attention to new ones. I want to thank everybody. So Mimi, I'm going to turn to you for the first one. This was asked even before our webinar, and so I thank the questioner. What are the key operational factors that distinguish online architecture program accreditation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And honestly, the way we had to approach that from day one when we were having our first accreditation about 13 years ago, and we were introducing online education. We weren't fully online, but we were starting to introduce online education to our NAB team, if you will, was that we said we would, and we have, produced online and on-site classes which have the same criteria, right? They have the same learning outcomes, they have the same goals. How we get there, we've sort of tuned over the years in terms of trying to make them even more in sync. So I would say at this point, when we have an accreditation coming up next year, when we have had more recent accreditation visits, there haven't really been any operational differences. We have had to put our online work right next to our on-site work, not identify it, and let our NAB team, evaluate them as equal. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Mimi. The second question by the same person, I did a little research on so I could be articulate about it. The question was, how do online programs, admission and recruitment officers identify applicants or students access to remote learning platforms? I think you're asking is, how do we check and make sure they've got the hardware and the software? And the reality is that admissions is a layered experience, starting with the first conversations and leading, before the students start the class, they actually have an orientation, and there's a whole series of introductory conversations and interviews, and they're almost all done virtually. So those processes are actually the first test. And within that, a lot of information is given to the student about what's going to be expected, what they're going to have access to, what hardware they're going to need. And so we set the students up very, very carefully with the information. Having said that, at the end of the day, we also have to trust that the students are ready to follow through as they start their first class. So we're clear about what it's going to take to get through the program, but sometimes we do find that students are a little bit slower at getting themselves set up than they said they would be. And it shows up, and we try very hard to identify those problems right off the bat if they actually appear in a class and are not able to support themselves. So we have a key set of people who are not faculty necessarily, that are sort of coaches that reach out to students when we see these things slipping through the cracks and identify those issues. We hope that it doesn't get that far, but it is a whole series of layers of kind of listening and talking to the student, make sure that they're ready. Mark, there's a question here about how are study abroad and international experiences integrated into the online architecture programs. I thought you could be best at launching that.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, so we had an architectural study abroad program for 3 years which was open to on-site and online architecture students. And the majority of the class was the travel portion. So we had like a 2-week travel to about 100 buildings all over Europe, which was facilitated by an outside vendor. We had live tours there, group discussion. So the 2-week travel component was the majority of the class. And then we had a one time a week meeting for one afternoon where I made a video conference with on-site and online students in a room in our school, and the online students would participate through something like Zoom. At the time we were using Adobe Connect, which was a bit of a challenge, I have to say. But and then what was really great to see is that the online students were amazingly engaged. They're hungry for these real world experiences when they're in their own realm and own environment outside of the school. I think most of them really made a leap in the class, and I felt that they were like sponges almost, like for this real life experience rather than the online experience. And I think a big part of our work is to facilitate this experience online. I think that you get on-site as a surplus benefit without even noticing it. Once you start teaching online, I think that's what many of you experience right now. There are challenges to bring your content across, and that to mitigate that is like the biggest obstacle. But yes, if you go on a study abroad trip, of course the online students will come with you on the study abroad trip. So I think the question is in my mind, how do you lead up to the trip, and what student experience are you able to provide until the trip starts? And what we did was a travel book. So we made a travel book with all projects that we would see. Some we would see in passing, others we would see in depth with tours on site. So we had all the 100 buildings in the book with a text, with plans and sections, and the students prepared this book together with me. And then during the trip, we used also the book, which was on our tablets and phones as a virtual copy to learn about the architecture that we are going to see or reflect on it. And it was really helpful to have this when you're in a building, that you have the floor plan and section and you could work with it. So that part of the trip was the preparing class before that, including presentations and research about some of the architects you would see, like or overarching themes. Hope that answers the question.
And just to add to that, thanks, Mark. We also have trips in the undergrad program that are combined into the curriculum as part of Studio, because we realize a lot of the undergraduate students don't have the funds to travel abroad, but getting them to travel even within the United States is important. And our online students are joining us on those trips. So they've been to New York, Miami, San Diego, and New Orleans in the past. And we have had success in getting our online students to join us. Sometimes they're even closer to that city than our San Francisco-based students. And they're all in the same curriculum at the same time, and the city is the site for their studio project. And so they create commonality around that curriculum. And then the faculty is there to guide them and broaden the kind of travel experience through the lens of the architect. So we try and look for travel experience for all of our students. There's definitely issues, and COVID was one of them. In January, we managed to get our, in January and February, we managed to get our Miami trip in just before the shelter in place started. We felt like we literally probably got it in under the wire, and luckily we don't believe anyone came back with COVID, but it definitely is a sign of the next few months and next year that travel may be increased obstacles. Karen, I'm thinking you might want to start this one. There's a couple of things. I know Mark has started to answer some of these questions in the chat post, which I really appreciate. But Karen, I think your experience with this one, being online all the time, how do you deal with late night and early morning requests for reviews? I think time management skills are very much needed here. And then there's a second one that you may want to touch on about the tools you use to sketch and express ideas in real time.
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that. You know, what's curious is all people, regardless of, you know, whether you're in the online section or on-site section, all students, most students need help with time management. And what's curious, in fact, actually, so for our online student population, the students who opt in to the online program, you know, it's usually more than one reason, they tend to have actually better time management skills, and also because I see the students at a fourth year level, so these are students who figured out how to do this, right, in the previous 3 years. So the request for kind of odd, you know, for meetings beyond the business hours, that is almost never from kind of a last minute frantic request. Actually, they're actually, some of them are better at time management than I am because they have to juggle so much. But it's actually the time difference, you know, when the students are in different countries. So for example, you know, I have a student in South Korea this semester. That's really hard. And so, you know, we just have to meet halfway, right? So something really late night for him, something really early morning for me, or vice versa. So we meet with students. So I meet with the student a couple times a week live, and we just, you know, we work with them, we make it work, we meet halfway. And then the drawing interface, yeah, that's really key. So our school started using something called Concept Board. It's a subscription, you know, service. It's a web-based, basically, so it's marketed as a virtual pinup space, but it has some rudimentary drawing tools. So when we have, you know, live meetings with students, or, you know, asynchronous, you know, comments, leaving behind comments. So Eric included in some of his as images in his slides, but essentially it's image based. So, you know, students will snap a photo of a model that they're building or a screenshot of something that they're doing. And then, you know, I basically go in, so I have a stylus. And so I go in and I basically draw on top of it, just as I would have, you know, with an on-site student work, using tracing paper and pens. And that's been really golden. Like, I mean, I think without it, it would have been a very, very different experience for both for me and for my students. And it's especially great when I have them on the phone. So it's a live interaction and we're both in Concept Board together looking at the same thing, and we can see each other where our cursors are. And, you know, so I'm drawing it as I'm speaking. And so that, for me, most closely replicates the studio one-to-one desk crate experience.
I just emailed an image to Danielle to maybe share on the screen. I don't know if she can see that image or if it's able to share that.
I don't think Danielle can. I think she's. Okay. I think the way it's set, but I think that there's some really great questions.
Yeah. The Concept Board, that image.
I think we had a few illustrations of Concept Board and that sketching in the early part of Eric's presentation. And so furthering this digital whiteboard question, Eric, do you want to start talking about the digital whiteboard, but also talk about group collaborations?
I think Karen just talked about the digital whiteboard.
Yes, yeah.
It definitely is I think crucial, especially for design studio. We do use one, but you can use any number of other ones. There's at least 2 or 3 competing products out there: Miro, M-I-R-O, and Mural, M-U-R-A-L. Microsoft actually also has their own whiteboard. I think it's just called Whiteboard. And so whatever you use, just in general, though, just sort of speaking about technology in general, we're not really stuck on any technology specifically, whether it's AutoCAD or Revit or what have you. We tend to be fairly technology agnostic, and the technology changes all the time. So I would say in general, whatever works for you, you should use. Well, sorry, what was the second part?
Well, it was sort of tying into it. How are those how does that whiteboard use, and what are the tools that help us with our group projects?
Yeah, we use those all the time for pretty much all the studios. One thing we have been also including, which I think I showed some images of, is BIM 360. So for our integrated design studio, 4th year undergraduate studio who do work in teams, they share the common cloud-based file. I think that was another question later on as well about design build. So both the integrated design studio and design build studios both use BIM 360 as a common platform. So design build kind of did it fairly recently out of necessity, since they couldn't meet in person, but they found it was actually a super powerful tool for them to work on the same project at the same time, even though they're not in the same place. So there's actually a lot of industry technology out there that's worth exploring to help facilitate that. And as you probably know, a lot of international offices such as SOM, HOK, Gensler, and other ones are pretty much internet-based, cloud-based. That's how they work in their common practices. So I actually look to them to see what they're doing, to see if we can sort of borrow ideas from how they conduct their own practices.
We also have group collaborations in the early part of the curriculum before they get to using Revit or some of the more sophisticated tools. So we really encourage the students to use some of the more fundamental digital tools to share drawings and trade drawings and start to generate group ideas. We got a question that I think is interesting. Have you found that online studios mitigate the age-old habits of studio colleagues making a habit of pulling all-nighters as studio culture? One of the things about our university is that we actually do not have an open 24/7 building policy. We close our building at 11:30 or 11 at night based on our location and the university policy. And really, based on things that have come out of the kind of best practices over the last 10 years that came from some AIAS studies about a decade ago. So all-nighters for our students might still be happening, but they're not necessarily happening in the physical studio. And we also, I will share that I think some of our students online have just found different times to work, and their working methods are, if they're successful, it shows up in the ability to create the work. But we also know that for some of them, they might start work at 9 o'clock at night after their children go to bed and work into the wee hours because it's merely the only time that they have. There's a question about, there's so many good ones, but I think I'm going to direct this one back to Mark and Eric, maybe starting with Mark, about the digital courses and the fabrication courses, because I think Mark took one of those on last summer. So the question is, how do you manage the teaching of laboratory-like related classes, e.g. digital fabrication, that's been mentioned?
I honestly don't know if I can answer this
Okay.
because I don't teach these classes. I do know this obviously from my faculty who teaches these classes. So I think what we find, it's really challenging to use a tool like the robot arm we have in school, for example, right? So because there are insurance issues involved and stuff like this. So I think what we're trying to do for the fabrication classes is to use fabrication methods that are widely available for students in their home countries or in their locations, which are things like shapeways, you know, these things, I assume, but we're actually currently working on aligning our fabrication classes more with on-site, because on-site the students are using robot arms, 3D printing technology, laser cutting to learn fabrication. And I think we're tackling this with our upcoming NAP visit actually. So we're trying to align these classes much more and rebuild them to facilitate, to use the tools that are actually available in school rather than from outside vendors. Maybe Eric can.
Yeah, this is actually a problem that we're trying to currently tackle at the moment with on-site. So our on-site woodshop is actually really nice. It's super sophisticated. It's got a lot of really nice tools. And when our on-site population went home, basically, they couldn't use it. And so the question is coming up right now of, well, how do I build a model? How do I build my final thesis model? And that's a good question. Quite frankly, we don't have the perfect answer for that yet. How we currently do it with our online students is that they have their, oftentimes they have their own shops. And I tell my students that they don't have to be super sophisticated. Use the tools that you have. You can order a lot of materials online through Amazon or through your local hobby shop or wherever. Back in my day, we used cardboard and X-Acto blades, right? And that's perfectly fine. In terms of things like more sophisticated tools, 3D printers and laser cutters, even laser cutters, you can get cheap versions of it online, but bottom line is you can use a cardboard and razor blades or X-Acto blades, whatever works. A lot of what we do is ad hoc.
There was another question about model building. I think that kind of leads into the fabrication question. We do build models online, and we do also we build working models as well as final models online. The final models are a bit of or it's hard to actually facilitate that. What I found personally in writing courses is that if I really make a model building process prescriptive, because I'm not there when they build the model necessarily in that course, because they're asynchronously when they're working on things at times, and they just come to discuss steps, but I can't stand next to them when they're working on a table saw or a foam cutter or something. So we prescribe our first semester students in the graduate program, we prescribe to them a foam cutter, a hot wire machine, which you can use to build a lot of different models. And the working models are not of an issue, I think, because they are messy, they are ad hoc in their nature. The issue is more with presentation models, but I also feel when the model process is, when we have multiple model processes in our curriculum that are very prescribed, where they actually learn how to use a fabrication tool, where they learn how to utilize certain materials, utilize certain tools, they go through that prescribed experience and they're learning by experience, right? So they're working through textbook step by step. At the end, they have a model that's actually quite acceptable and can compare with something on site. And we do this early in our curriculum. So later in the curriculum, they would have a variety of tools and know how they're used and how they can achieve certain levels of model building quality.
So I know we're running out of time. I'm going to ask Daniela maybe to type in and tell me whether we can go 5 minutes over just to answer a couple questions here. But Karen, there's a whole series of questions about studio culture and studio conversations, encouraging informal learning. I know this is something you spend a lot of time thinking about. Can you talk about the tools you've used and the ways that you've thought about creating this kind of culture within your studios?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so there are, many different tools available for that we can use. So I found that lack of, tools or access to tools is not the hurdle. The hurdle is really kind of the awkwardness, right? So on-site students, they come to class first day, even if you first semester, just, by being physically present in the same space at the same time, there's already a community that's starting to form. And so the kind of, in the lack of that, not having that, that shared space, basically I make the online students do this, right? So things like, so there's our online student body tend to be smaller as a cohort than our on-site. And so, I basically throughout the semester, beginning in week 1, I have the on-site students make a little video introduction of themselves, and then the online students do the same, so that they can, and I share that with each other across the section so that they can match names and faces. And then beyond that point, we all meet in the same concept board. So, it's basically 2 sections sharing the same virtual space. And so, each week as students post their work in progress, and, we leave behind, red light comments to the photos of drawings or models that they have, so each kind of student has an area that's, designated to them. And so, and I make a point of, pointing to, we're trying to solve this problem with an online student. Let's go look at, the on-site student, Robert's trying to do the same thing. Let's go look at, what he's done. So there's a lot of kind of just me playing bridge, so me trying to reference very, very actively, almost in every interaction across the 2, because I have to be the proxy for them. But, so, and the second part of this is, it really also does really depend on the student. Some of the, so we all are, kind of extroverted in different ways and introverted in different ways. And the online student who are extroverted, they love it. They reach out to the on-site students, through all of the, so we use multiple modes of communication. So they do through all of this, modes that are offered to them, and some of the kind of the quiet ones, will tend to do that less. And so they get it indirectly through me. And I just want to point out, I know we're up for time, but the horizontal learning, an attendee mentioned, I do think that that's probably, for me, the biggest loss. So in an online environment, that camaraderie among the students within the same section, as well as across, the other sections or other students, that kind of community, that group bonding is just really hard to replicate. It's not that it never happens, it does happen, but it takes that student, it takes that online student who is committed, invested, understands the value, follows all the recommendations, and then they create these, great friendships and, working relationships. But it's much, much harder in an online environment. I do think that's the biggest loss.
I'm going to jump on to a question that is near and dear to my heart. The question is, could you perhaps elaborate on how a hybrid approach might be employed to combine online studio and design build, live or community-based projects? So right before we got on this webinar, I was writing a newspaper article on our design build studio that is, of course, an on-site based program, but it went online 4 weeks ago. And they've basically created an online office. There's 5 students in the studio, and they are serving an underserved community in San Francisco. So they have all the hurdles of access to their community-based clients. But they are, first they kind of regrouped as a kind of office in and of themselves, working separately. And now they're setting up their community meetings that were supposed to happen in person. They're setting them up this coming week in virtual realms, and they're going to be working with children from the age 5 to 15. They're going to be mentoring. They know they're going to have to break it down in the same way we do, to meeting more 2-on-1. But that's going to lead to more mentorship from the architecture student to the young person in the community. And we're also going to be working with the adults and residents in the design that they're developing, which is actually a public space, a shared space in a housing project in Hunters Point area of San Francisco. So we are answering those questions kind of as we talk right now. And I think that there are definitely limitations, but the studio didn't stop, the relationships didn't stop, and the design is continuing. The fabrication will hopefully start as we can bring people together in safe ways. So I'm excited to report that to you, but definitely we feel lucky that we happen to be in a design mode. We just finished a community-based project that was built and finished in December. So and that's a large part of these ACSA discussions. Lastly, well, actually, I want to say that one of the questions is about the kind of student that that's coming out of our these different processes, and and I've lost the question, but I'm going to find it really quickly because I think it's really important. The question is whether we're developing a different kind of person, or different learning outcomes and different methodologies. Does this create a split in the profession? I'm going to launch this and then ask my colleagues. I would just want to start with what Karen said, which is every student is different. They have different methodologies. One should never assume that an online student fits a profile and an on-site student fits a profile. We have online students who are who have full shops and build physical models with great joy. And we have on-site students who are still struggling with how to keep cardboard together. And vice versa. We have introverts and extroverts, and we have different learning methodologies. So I don't think that we're splitting the profession along these lines, but is there anyone else who'd like to jump into that one? I think it's a really good question.
This is Mimi, I will. And I think it's an excellent question too. And having had interns, you know, who have been fully on-site students and interns who have been hybrid, what we call hybrid students, who have taken studios or other classes online and on-site. I haven't had an intern that has been fully online yet, although I would love that. I'm not seeing a split. I am seeing, as you mentioned, differences in personal methodologies, perhaps different experiences from the platform, but certainly, again, back to the learning outcomes, no, we can still have the same conversations about design with either. We can still have the same conversations about collaboration, you know, all of those things. I haven't seen a difference, so.
Yeah, I'll just add an interesting anecdote. One of our recent undergraduates, Cody, who's actually displayed in the slideshow, who's in South Dakota, wrote us a really nice letter. He's been now back working for a year or so, and he wrote this really nice letter saying that because of COVID-19, he's also had to go online, but for him, you know, it's kind of a piece of cake because he's been online with us for the last 5 years, and in large part because of his great experience in the integrated design studio online with our on-site students. You know, it's kind of a piece of cake for him. He's already done that, and so he's leading his office in terms of teaching them how to work online with the other local locations in his office. So he's, in fact, turning out to be a firm leader for him. So
I think that's a great question. And thank you to the others. I wanna just add. I think that is relatively normal in the profession. It's getting more normal to work online and work collaboratively with engineers, with team members that are actually remote. And it has been the norm in other professions already. And it's actually, architecture is really slow in catching on with this, but I think especially this COVID-19 situation right now, is a sea change also for the profession, because people are getting used to do this. And when we look at the students, there is no either or. What we are actually trying to do now in the grad program with a NAP visit coming up is to actually align the two programs more and more, so that there's actually no difference between the curriculum, at least. And the students, it's a personality thing. So one student is different than the other. So I don't think there's a clear cookie cutter shape that fits the description.
So since we're here and we're here because of COVID-19, I want to group the last questions together, basically. I think it's a general question about how COVID-19 has impacted our online program. What are the most significant things that were lost when we had to move on-site students online overnight? I think that maybe each one of us, and Mimia, join us, because you are running your office now overnight, and maybe you can talk about it from that perspective as well. But Karen, do you want to launch into anything about how the last few weeks has shifted and how it impacted you?
Sure. I mean, for my online section, since in my online section, the tools haven't changed. The modes of interaction, that's all been the same, since we started the semester. But I mean, it's a pandemic. I mean, it's now, so the kind of the staggered events that we see in the papers about how it's affecting different parts of the world and the country. I mean, so we're seeing that in our students. So even though the tools are unaffected, their lives are affected, kids home, or, parents sick, or, right? So those kinds of behaviors that they've had to do. And because, for this particular, the weeks right after the lockdown started for them, we just so happened to have started this physical model assignment. So even for those who are beyond, Bay Area, so the one's in Michigan, one's in Massachusetts, they're non-essential businesses, so they can't get their materials. So things like that. But like, I think above all, I do try to, I mean, it affects me emotionally, psychologically. So I do always try to acknowledge that in the calls now when I connect with them on a weekly basis, that I mean, it's something that, I mean, in a way, in a very profound way, so what's happening is so deeply architectural and spatial, right? So that's the limitation that we all are feeling. And I think it's a really great way, on the one hand, to reflect on just, commiserate, but, but in terms of their education and, this path that they've chosen, it's really important, like, I mean, even if the everyday user, doesn't have the training, it affects them. And that makes this profession that they've chosen to enter all the more valuable, right? And that the what they're learning they're learning to imagine being somebody else, right? That's really, really important, because it affects everyone.
Thanks, Karen. I've been told we have 2.5 minutes. Is there a 1 minute addition to that question that somebody would like to add?
Sure, Jen, super quick. Again, for us professionally, because we've had staff who have already been off site working remotely with us for 1.5 years, that hasn't been, that's been seamless. Our engineers and our landscape architects are also in different places. I've got some in Seattle and some in LA, one in Portland. So again, this has been somewhat seamless for us. I think for them, it's not as easy, because here I am in San Francisco and our work is affordable housing. So we're deemed essential and I get to come into the office. It's really no change for me. I am finding my engineers and landscape architects working from basements and garages and under a lemon tree and all sorts of other interesting places, because they have children and they're trying to homeschool. However, I think we've all come to realize, while our deadlines or our tasks may take us a little bit longer in our remote world now, we're still getting work done. So I want to say.
Thank you. There was a question that ties to this, asking whether we have any access and equity issues related to the students moving online. And yes, it's definitely come up. Our school has been really phenomenal in trying to get support out to students. We've actually given students computers. We've given them remote access to our computers. We've really tried to solve the problems, but they're not all solvable. Doris Guerrero, thank you for your comment, because we're experiencing the same thing. Students have in the middle of the semester found themselves on the other side of the world with their families and having to figure out how to get their resources and their tools. And so we're working with them. We're building a kind of database of understanding. So in general, we're all in this together, and we try and remind our students that we're in this together. And I really thank you all for taking time there. If you have any interest in reading our topics at the very, very top of the chat that we would like to talk about more, please let us know. Thanks so much.